Hello and welcome to today's webinar. We see that many of you are still joining the webinar room, so we'll give you just a few seconds to let others join us, and we will get started in just a few moments. Thanks for being here. Welcome to the Child Welfare Information Technology Systems Managers and Staff webinar series, brought to you on behalf of the Health and Human Services Administration for Children and Families, Children's Bureau. My name is Phil Breitenbuscher, and I am your host for today's webinar. Today's discussion is entitled CCWIS Technical Assistance, Self-Assessment Tools, and Monitoring Reviews, Part 2 of the Self-Assessment Tool Overview. Let me first begin by providing you some ways that you can participate in today's webinar. There are several, and we do hope that you will participate. First, we want to encourage you to ask questions throughout the webinar. You can do that by using the question and answer feature that should be located either at the top of your screen or the bottom. It should have a Q&A button or feature similar to what's on the left side of my screen now. Please type all of your questions there. That allows us to monitor those questions and to respond to each of them the best that we can. Any question that's submitted and we're not able to respond to that question during the webinar will be followed up following the webinar. You can also ask a question live during the webinar. There will be several opportunities in which we will pause and take questions live. How we ask you to do that is to use the raise hand feature, which looks similar to what's on the right side of my screen. Click on the raise hands feature, and once you've done that, please monitor your chat. We will send you a private chat message just alerting you or letting you know that we see your hand is up and ensuring that you're ready to ask that question live. Once you've confirmed that, we will unmute your microphone or your computer, and then we will call on you to ask your question. If you've called in to the webinar using your telephone, you can also raise your hand by hitting *9. And we will go ahead and unmute your line that way as well. Be aware if you haven't put your name in and we can only see your number, we'll call you out by your phone number, okay? But we do want to encourage the questions. We think that it makes it more engaging for all of our participants, and so we appreciate your questions. Following today's webinar, there are also a couple ways for you to stay engaged. First, you can continue to ask questions via email by sending those questions to cwis.questions@acf.hhs.gov. The other way you can provide feedback or even ask questions is by participating in the survey that will pop up as you exit today's webinar. And we did want to acknowledge the many of you that participated in the survey during part 1's webinar. We wanted to say thank you so much for your feedback and for participating in that survey. The feedback you've given us is very, very helpful and helps for us to plan for future webinars, as well as understand your technical assistance and training needs. The last way we'll ask for you to continue to participate in today's webinar is to participate in a few polling questions. And with that, we'd like to invite you to participate in our first polling question. Here is the polling question. How familiar are you with the CCWIS self-assessment tools? Please select one of these responses. Your first response could be, what tools? We have briefly looked over the tools. We are reading and analyzing the tools. We are working on completing at least one tool, or we have completed at least one tool. So we'll give you a few seconds. You should be able to respond to this poll now, and we'll give you a few moments to respond. Excellent. Thank you for responding to the poll. It looks like 30% of you said we have briefly looked at the tools, and another third of you are reading or analyzing the tools. So it looks like you're beginning to take a look at these tools. There are about 20% that haven't really been exposed yet to the tools, and so this will be a great opportunity for you. And there are 7 of you, or 12%, that have already completed a tool, and another 4 of you, or 7%. So there's more than 10 of you on today's webinar that are in the middle of completing at least one of the tool or have already completed one of the tool. So again, there will be opportunities for you to participate during the webinar, and we'd love to hear from your experiences as well. If you're working through a tool, this is a great opportunity to ask questions that are coming up, or if you've completed a tool and questions arose during that process, we'd love for you to share that experience with us. All right, let's go ahead, and we will now move to our second poll question, which is this: how or when do you think you will use the tools? And here you can select all that apply. So during the planning, during development, after modules are developed, in preparation for a CCWIS assessment review, or CAR, we don't plan on using one, or we don't know yet. Okay, let's give you a few seconds to respond there. You can click on all that apply. Okay, we'll give you a few more seconds to respond before we close this poll. Excellent. Again, thank you for your participation in our poll questions. We do appreciate it. Looks like nearly 60% actually plan to use these tools during development. Nearly half of you are planning to use it during the planning stage, which we believe is an excellent way to use these tools, is during the planning stage, and we're hopeful that they're useful during that stage. Also, nearly half of you are planning to use them after modules are developed. Another half of you, also about half of you, are saying that it's not another half, it's also half of you are saying in preparation for CCWIS assessment review, or your CARs. And about a quarter also said we're not really sure yet. So we hope that today's webinar helps you think about where it might be helpful to use these assessment tools. Let me now move to introducing today's presenters. You will hear from Teresa Young, who's the Director of the Division of State Systems. You'll also hear from Alex Cambaris, a Federal Contract Support, and David Baker, also Federal Contract Support. And again, my name's Phil Breitenbuscher, and I will serve as your moderator. With that, I'm pleased to hand things over to Alex. Alex?
Thanks, Philip, and good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. On your screen, you'll see a brief overview of the agenda we're covering today. First, we're going to talk about the status of the tool development, where we're at with all of them, the formats of the tools, the purpose for each tool. Then we'll discuss how agencies can provide evidence that program goals and/or requirements are met, what we see as the advantages of the tools, using the tools in your CCWIS project, and finally, questions. And as Philip mentioned, we will pause throughout the presentation at the end of certain sections to take questions throughout this presentation. Next slide, please. So I'm going to kick us off this afternoon with an update about the various tools, including those still in development. Next slide, please. So on your screen, you'll see two columns. On the left, we have what we call the system tools, self-assessment tools, and on the right, what we are calling the program self-assessment tools. A few of them are highlighted there and indicate the ones that are still in development. There are 4 of them. We're actively working on them, and we did receive a question during the last webinar about when our target date what our target date is for these 4 tools. Unfortunately, we don't have a specific target date. We're working on all of them because these cross over with different divisions. We are making sure we are being as consistent as possible as we get this information out there, and we will provide updates as we go along. And like the other tools, we plan on sharing drafts of the tools with a few 4 agencies to get feedback prior to publication. All right, next slide, please. All right, I'm going to spend the next few minutes talking about the format of the tools. This is a lot of information. Please don't get overwhelmed with the busy slides. We provide several examples over the next couple slides as a helpful tool in case people want to revisit this slide deck in the future. I want to cover the tools with you, especially for that 20% who responded to the poll question about not knowing what the tools are. So next slide, please. So every tool that we have done, the 11 to date and the 4 still in the process of being completed, have the sections you see on your screen. They all provide an overview in the form of an introduction about the scope and purpose of the tool. Every tool has a similar format, and the format section provides an outline for the sections of that tool. The overview and background information collects a few questions, not more than 5, 6, or 7, depending on the tool, but this helps provide background information. Who are the users? Are there external systems? For the automated functions modules contained within that specific tool. Then we get to the heart of the tool, which are the goals section. And this is where agencies respond to a series of goals by providing evidence of how the CCWIS meets those goals. And I'll be covering these in detail in a few minutes, much more in depth. And finally, all tools have resources and additional considerations. These are examples, links to outside resources, even some sample data elements on the program tools. The genesis for including this section and this technical assistance was early feedback from states who wanted, examples of how to implement the goals highlighted earlier in the tool. And we provided these resources as mechanisms or examples of how agencies could use these tools to support the goals or help assess the goals. Next section, or slide, please. All right. So there are some minor differences between some of the tools. While the previous slide was consistent across all tools, we have something called foundational requirements in the design, reporting, and program area tools. And that's because these are goals specifically identified in the regulations that describe CCWIS. So it's almost a one-for-one relationship between something in the regulation and this is our attempt to operationalize that for agencies to then demonstrate how they meet those. The tools include space to identify the functional process factors and data elements in this next example, which are only found in the program area tools. And they're examples that help shed light or provide examples of how an agency, or CCWIS rather, can be efficient, economical, and effective. We know response is needed. There is a column that says check yes if these are included in your CCWIS. We're not expecting you to comment on that, other than using it as perhaps an example earlier in the document as evidence for achieving one of your goals. And then finally, the design tool has an attachment to it in Excel format that includes a spreadsheet of the conformance factors described on the self-assessment tool. And we plan on using the tool during design reviews and encourage you to use it yourself throughout your developmental life cycle to compare against the tool and see how you're doing. When the time comes for a design review, you'll be a step ahead. Next slide, please. Thank you. So that concludes the format section. And now I'm going to spend the remainder of my time talking about each tool. There are 11 tools, and each of the 11 has 2 slides. So one slide will be about an overview, and the next slide will be a few examples of the purpose and goals of the tool. I promise you I will go quickly. I'm not going to read them all to you. And again, just a reminder that all this information is there to look at in the future if you so choose. And certainly they're representative of what is on the actual tools themselves. But for the purpose of this audience and today's webinar, I'm going to briefly cover each tool. Next goal, please. Next slide, please. So I'm going to be covering these, and they're separated: first program and then system, and they're sorted alphabetically. This may not be the order you are building if you are building these iteratively, but we felt the best this afternoon to have some order, and so we went alphabetically. So the first tool, adoption, addresses adoption and to some extent guardianship. And the goal of this tool is to focus on the outcomes and reporting and measurements of functions in a CCWIS that support the goal of adoption. Next slide. So this tool includes goals related to achieving compliance, reporting, and 4E requirements, but it also addresses how the CCWIS helps agencies achieve recruitment goals and ensure that children have timely permanency. So you'll note in many of the tools, especially the program area, there is a balance between the compliance factors, but also the outcomes and making sure we're successfully supporting children in the goal to achieve permanency and maintain safety and well-being. So this tool is looking at how information is stored, accessed, shared, so that adoptive families and family recruiters have the information they need to perform their jobs and get services for children and identify or match families. It also helps the CCWIS serve as a way to tell the story of the child so that information isn't lost during their foster care years. They may come back years or decades from now and want to access some of the information. And some of these goals address that storage of information. Next slide, please. Case management is the next tool and is a broad category, and it includes case management of not just out-of-home foster care cases, but it also has goals related to preservation, family preservation, and prevention cases. We did receive a question sometime over the last few weeks about a tool for prevention, and those type of functions are currently in this case management tool. The tool attempts to operationalize what is really an abstract concept of how CCWIS can support the agency in their goal to achieve safety, permanency, and well-being by providing the goals on the next slide, please. So really, case management is about finding the right service at the right time for the child and their family to support permanency. And how does the CCWIS support this flow of information? As a list of goals, how does the CCWIS take the raw data and present it in a manner that is useful and easy to understand so workers can manage cases at their desks or in the field? How does it support the collection of data so that they are not clicking different screens and going all over looking for different places to store information, really taking their business workflow and making it more complicated? And finally, what automations are in place to support the interventions they're seeking or tracking progress, and then later reporting and managing outcomes. Next slide, please. All right. Foster care and service provider management is the next tool. And this tool addresses a broad array of functions related to the recruitment, approval, management of foster homes, as well as the identification, utilization of service providers. Next slide, please. So for workers to effectively case manage, they need to make sure the children on their caseloads are in safe and stable placements. And this tool addresses includes goals related to assessment of that. It also addresses functions related to the approval of foster homes and the recruitment of them, and how CCWIS supports collection and use of an array of data elements necessary for that. But it also addresses the qualitative work of engaging families for recruitment and support. Since so many of these functions are deeply connected to case management, eligibility, finance, among others, there may be some crossover in this tool with these others. And so there are some goals addressing how these different parts work together. So if you're building a system modularly, which hopefully you are if you're doing CCWIS, but if you're building it iteratively, I would say, how do the different modules work together and seamlessly to meet the goals? And this is a perfect example of a tool that bridges many areas. Next slide, please. All right. The next tool is on intake. And for many agencies building systems using an incremental developmental practice, this is often the first module, or at least it has seemed to be over the last couple of years. And perhaps more than any other tool, we've had the most examples from this one because many agencies have started here. But this tracks the case right from case inception or referral inception, depending on lingo in your state. It's from when the moment the report is assigned, when the call comes into the report is assigned to a worker for future investigation or assessment. Next slide, please. So in addition to the bullets you see on the screen, which are several of the goals related to the intake tool, the intake tool attempts to address how an agency uses the CCWIS to support the initial collection of data and to screen the referrals. So how is the CCWIS supporting this in a timely manner, not complicating things, and a user experience that supports the timely collection of data, rather than hunting and pecking to enter all and collect all the information. It also supports the communication between the intake worker and whoever is taking the referral at the next step to make sure no information is lost in the translation or transition. And then finally, we have the investigation tool. Next slide, please. This is the last of the program area tools. And this one is designed to address the goals related to the investigation of those cases that have come in and the tracking and support of the outcomes to make sure goals are met, but also ensuring that safety of the child is tracked and maintained. Sorry for my distractedness. My dog is going crazy in the background. All right, so the investigation tool is providing information. I'm so sorry. Phil, can you pause 1 second? I'm sorry, my dog apparently wants to attack the mailman, so I am back.
I think, Alex, that you should at least put a big photo of your dog on the screen so that folks can have some idea of why it was so important for you to stop.
If I knew how to do that in the middle of this webinar, I probably would. Maybe next one. But yeah, the mailman is not her friend. All right, so I'm back. So where was I? Investigation. And one of the most important things is timely and accurate information to the field, for example, if a worker is in the field, or historical information to make a proper safety assessment. And this tool addresses goals that help get at that information. So that concludes the program area tools, and then I'm going to switch to the system tools. Next slide, please. So the first of the system tools is what we call administration, and this is a catch-all for all the type of background functions in a CCWIS system. And depending on the architecture of your CCWIS, it could be done in a number of different ways. So we wrote the tool to focus on the outcomes and end game more so than the details about specifically how you're getting it done. Our intent with this tool is to understand how you're achieving it, not necessarily the architecture of it all, because that is addressed in the design tool. Next slide, please. Search functions, data retrieval, management of assignments are just some of the examples covered by this tool. You may lump some of these features in a security plan, and on the tool itself, we highlighted a few areas where there may be some crossover. And some agencies who have used these tools and given us feedback have mentioned that there's some crossover or they do it differently, and that's really okay. In fact, on the section where it asks for evidence, you could say we responded to this on the design tool or the administration tool, whatever the case may be. And let's go to the next slide. All right. Next slide is data quality. And this tool operationalizes how the data quality plan and biennial review were, let me strike that. This tool builds upon, not operational, builds upon the data quality tool plan and biennial review to make sure that they are being operationalized in a way that is effective, efficient, and economical. So how the agency addresses governance is addressed in the data quality plan. Is it successful is addressed in the self-assessment tool. So there is some crossover, and we recognize that, but we see this as taking the plan and the biennial review findings a step further to see if it was executed effectively. And so as you're filling this tool out and looking at the evidence sections, it's providing the evidence that you implemented a governance plan and it was successful, for example. Another area is automation. How is the agency maximizing automation to support data quality? How does the CCWIS support the resolution of data quality issues through prompts, reporting, triggers? And one area we added to the tool, and you'll see in several tools, is data dictionary. How does the CCWIS use a data dictionary to support data quality, especially between different vendors, different modules, with exchanges? And this tool identifies those goals and then asks for evidence from the agency to meet those goals. Next slide, please. Design requirements. So we did a webinar back in February of 2021. If you are interested and would like to know more details about this specific tool, it's recorded and on our website. I'll give you a quick overview now. This tool looks at goals related to the design requirements that are specified in the CCWIS, in the regulations that describe the CCWIS. Next slide, please. The goals are split into key areas, identify the italicized words on this slide. As I mentioned earlier this afternoon, there's a separate spreadsheet that we did that is included with this tool, and it breaks down these italicized areas onto the spreadsheet so agencies can self-score how they're doing in meeting these goals. And these come directly out of the regulations describing CCWIS. And agencies who have started completing this tool so far have reported to us that they found it very helpful even before they started the development cycle, that in the planning phase, it was helpful so they could formulate what they would like to do and try and ensure compliance as early as possible. So we took that poll question earlier, and quite a few of you said you would be using it during planning phase, and we strongly encourage that. And some of your peers have found that to be helpful as well. Next slide, please. All right. We're in the home stretch here, 3 more tools. So reporting. The reporting tool addresses federal reporting requirements like AFGARs, NIDA, NCANs, prevention, but it also addresses state, tribal, or agency reporting, since that is part of the regulations as well. The intent with this tool is to help agencies assess the effectiveness of the design, development, and training for reports and data in the CCWIS. Next slide, please. And like the design tool, we have broken this out into different sections, as you see on the screen with the italicized words. And we have goals in each of these sections to try and identify the key areas for reporting in a CCWIS. And as you are supplying evidence to meet those goals, if you are choosing to do these self-assessment tools, you can identify whether it's a sample of a report, whether it's how the system generates the data that you need for the reports, whether it's a dashboard or ad hoc reporting, whatever the case may be. And finally, you'll see one of the examples I mentioned earlier, data dictionary, where there are goals across several of the tools that may seem like they cross over, and you may wish to respond and say you provided an answer in another tool, but there are nuances to some of them, and for different reasons, we've included them in the different tools. For example, for data dictionary, we strongly believe that CCWIS, or frankly, any system, requires a strong data dictionary to ensure consistency and ensure data quality. All right, security is the next one. Seems to be everyone's favorite topic these days in the news. But this tool highlights industry standards, and we pulled from a lot of industry standard and technical assistant tools out there as we built this tool, and provided a lot of examples of external resources if you wish more information. And this is a good reminder to everyone that these tools aren't just about collecting information about how an agency meets the goals in a particular area, but they're also technical assistance tools at their heart, and they provide information sometimes externally, as in this case, of where people can get the information. Next slide, please. All right. So we've broken this tool into several areas, many of which you see on the screen, and we have goals in these different areas to collect information and have the agency provide the evidence of how they are meeting that. We are not looking for the level of detail of a system risk analysis plan. You probably already have one of those. So in the case of this tool, that external document may be the evidence for meeting several of these goals. And we would love to have access to that and see where the tool addresses these goals as an example of what we might be looking for. What we don't want is you to do needless work and extra work if it is something you've already done. We are happy with seeing that existing work rather than having you try and recreate something. Next slide, please. And finally, the last tool I'll be covering today is user experience. And I will say that while user experience topics are included in pretty much every tool, this one specifically addresses different areas of good user design and user experience. And we provide a wealth of industry tools and also standards in the later sections of the tool as technical assistance. Next slide, please. We split this tool into 4 areas that address content, usability, accessibility, and user engagement. And the goals of each of those sections, such as the ones you see on the screen, are really taken from industry standards and best practice. We mentioned in the last webinar that it is our intent to speak to users when we do monitoring reviews and the CCWIS assessment review. And some of the goals on this tool are directly related to their experience and how they engage with the system. And feedback, again, from some early states that have looked at this tool and have started using it is, how do they engage users at the start, during, and after a system is being designed? And this tool helps identify some of those key areas where that can be useful. So I just covered 11 of the self-assessment tools, and I provided a brief overview of each of them. I did very high level, and I condensed a lot of information into a very short amount of time. So we are going to pause here and take a few questions from the audience about any of the tools or anything we have said so far before we move on to other sections. And just as a reminder, all this information is directly out of the tools. We just condensed them for this presentation. So if you would like to know a little bit more about a particular tool, I encourage you to go take a look at it. But Philip, I'll pause now and see if we have any questions.
All right, Alex. Well, thank you very much. Certainly lots of information there. I just wanted to first just remind our participants today that they are able to submit questions in at least two ways. The first is by using the QA function, which is at the top of the screen. Please just type your questions in there, and we can then monitor those and respond to you. You're also able to raise your hand, and that's again using the raise hand feature. We will see that your hand has been raised, and then I will privately chat you so that you're able to come off mute and ask your question live. The last thing I want to encourage participation is those of you, I think there were 10 or 12 of you who had begun using these tools, and some of you have already completed those tools. It might be interesting also to hear from you. And we have a few moments here. We can check in with you. If you'd like to speak about your experience, just raise your hand and we can unmute you. So with that, we do have a question here, and I'll throw this out to our panel of speakers. Should we depend on the resources or additional consideration sections as the detail to our foundational requirements responses? And I'll throw that out there to the group. Let me know if you'd like me to read that again.
I can take it. I think you could, certainly the reason that we put those there is because we're trying to build capacity, as Alex mentioned. And so the hope would be that that reference material, would spark ideas and provide guidance, about ways that you might improve or work on that particular goal. We wouldn't expect that you would just hand us a copy of it, but obviously if you are looking at that and you are adhering to some of those standards and you can document or show how you've done that, then yes, that would be good.
Thank you, Teresa. Another just a quick question from the audience. They're wondering if the templates can be emailed out, or how do they access the templates? And Alex, I think you addressed this in some of your comments. Do you want to take this, or someone else on the panel?
Sure. Actually, the last slide, or one of the last slides today, has a link to the website where that is located. And so it's there if you need, and I can post it in the chat box if that would be also helpful. Once we move on later, I'll find the link and put it in the chat box.
Okay, thank you. So yeah, so those templates are available on the website, and look for the link in the chat later in the presentation. At this point, we're going to go ahead and again, we encourage you to submit questions as we go through the presentation, but it's now my pleasure to hand things over to Teresa Young. Teresa?
Thank you. Next slide, please.
Providing evidence that program goals, requirements are met.
Alex went over, as he said, very quickly, the tools that have been developed so far. And as you can see, they're quite comprehensive, and child welfare, as you all already know, is extremely complex. And so it can be overwhelming, to see all of those goals, that the system supports. So my teammates did a wonderful favor for me. They saved the very best slide for me for right now. So if you remember nothing else, from this presentation, I would say this slide, which is number 37, when you get this slide deck, is one of the most critical. They're all critical, and I'm kind of teasing, but I do think this slide has a lot of important information in it. And the reason is because that this type of evidence that is at least described at a high level on this slide could be used pretty much across the board, pretty much across any tool. So, I do think you should look at all the tools. You should be thinking about evidence to support, all of those goals that are listed, and be able to think through and show how the system supports them. But, a quick shortcut in some ways when you have short, resources is to make sure basically that you have these three areas as strong as you possibly can, and that you've really done a good job, thinking through what the evidence is in these areas. So the other thing I wanted to comment on, and we've talked about it in the first presentation, and you'll just keep hearing us, with this messaging about thinking about compliance differently and moving away again from prescriptive functions or automating, thinking about automation as just automating all the required forms, or automating, all of the data, that you need to report. We've already learned, that in order to develop a good system, we have to go much further than that. We really have to be looking at how folks need to use the system, what activities and outcomes and goals, are they trying to achieve with the system? And so all of these tools in some ways are really designed with that thinking behind them, which is, the proof is in the pudding. Is the tool, really achieving the goals that we all wrote down and all said, we want we want our CCWIS to do X. How do we know, if it's really doing X? So if we start with user feedback, which also seems like such a simple construct, I think all of us, or many of us, would say, of course, we get user feedback. Users participate in our requirements process, and users participate in testing. And so, and we have a help desk, so yes, we are using information from users, but I think we really need to challenge ourselves kind of as an industry is, first of all, who are our users, who is impacted, by these systems, and, are we really involving them and giving them the opportunity to give us feedback? And when they give us feedback, are we getting it on an ongoing basis? Not just sort of, okay, well, we're doing this deployment and we got this feedback, but do we have multiple mechanisms, in place to where we know, that we can get feedback from multiple kinds of stakeholders. And so, we have examples here on this slide. You may want to use survey data, or you may want to create specific user groups, or you may want to create, specific teams, or, you may have a message board, where folks are sharing information, or newsletters, or work groups. I mean, these are off the top of our head. We really want to know from you. And again, as we said, the industry is improving in this area so much. There's a lot out there, about human-centered design and doing it well. Are we observing, as well, not just getting the feedback, but observing. So the second part on this slide is around automation. And again, this is around, have we been disciplined around the data quality checks that we've built into our system and the auditing capability? Is it actually being used? Is it available? Can we see, kind of when information is changing or when anomalies occur? How obvious, is that to us? And, do we have the kind of automation? And I know I talk to most of you a lot, you talk to me about your concerns and the different mechanisms that you're putting in place to make sure the system can be modified easily. And that's just crucial, because we all know that if it can't be modified quickly or modified in response to the needs of end users, then the system will be, stale, out of date, and not used. So we really appreciate the efforts that folks are making to make sure that that design requirement, that it can be shared, and that it can be modified if the business rules are separated from the core logic. All of that, really gets to, is the system going to be able to be supported long term? And finally, do we have the data that we need, and are we using it? I think, again, a learning from CCWIS, we were data rich, right? Isn't that, but information poor, because it was very hard to get the information out of the system in a usable format. So these three areas, they're on every tool. And, you know, if you come up with really creative and outstanding methods, you know, where you're demonstrating to us, you know, yes, there are many other responsibilities, you know, but I would just say that this is crucial, you know, this slide. Next, please.
Existing documentation.
So this slide starts to get at, you know, the kinds of documentation that you may want to provide to demonstrate compliance. You know, you may want to show your actual practice and program model, and then, you know, how it's documented, and then how it is supported, you know, by the technology system, and how is the technology system impacting the goals of that model. You know, are you demonstrating improvement? You know, are things better since the technology was introduced, you know, than prior, you know, to having the technology? Did you pivot, like you learned things and based on what you learned, you know, in practice, and you made a change? Did that change result in efficiencies or effectiveness? So, you know, really what we're looking for are, you know, for you to be thinking about baseline, you know, what kinds of information, what kinds of processes do I already have some historical, you know, kinds of knowledge or baseline data? And then as I'm moving forward and I'm thinking about, okay, I'm building these system modules, and they support very important functions, you know, in the child welfare world. And how do I know, you know, that the system that I'm building is really helping achieving those goals? And, you know, is the system helping with workload management? Is it affecting those areas that we know, you know, impact practice, such as turnover? Is it helping folks do things more efficiently? Next slide, please. Okay, sorry about that. I just think I just covered that slide. Sorry about that. All right, so we're going to pause here a little bit and ask if there are questions before we move on to how you might want to use the tools. Do we have any questions?
None have come in yet, Teresa, on the Q&A, but again, I'll just encourage folks to use that Q&A function at the top of your screen, or raise your hands, and we can unmute you.
Okay, well, we'll hand it off to David.
Thank you, Teresa. I'm going to go over in this section different ways that you can use the tools in your CCWIS project. And really the main takeaways of this section are that the tools can be used in different ways for different purposes in different stages of your project. That's the main sort of gist of this section. Next slide, please. I'm starting with this because this is probably what most people think about how they want to use the tools, and that is getting ready for a monitoring review or a CCWIS assessment review. Now, I want to point out that the tools can be used in either case. In other words, they can be used if you're doing a complete review covering all aspects and all functions of your system. I mean, you may complete all the tools and then have them all set for a comprehensive CAR review. Or you may have one or several that you want to use for a more targeted monitoring review. For instance, if you were looking at a single module, such as intake or case management, that tool you may want to complete for that review. Or if the review was focusing on a different system aspect, sort of a global aspect, such as security or data quality or design, you could complete those tools. But either way, either approach, the tools can help you prepare for a review. One way they can really help is by helping you prepare by getting ready for a demo. As many of you who were on the presentation about 2 weeks ago remember, we mentioned that it can be really challenging getting everything organized and arranged and all your ducks in a row for a system demonstration. These tools can really help because they highlight the topics that ACF will focus on and likely ask questions about during your demonstration. So, and in this case, you don't even have to fill out the tools. I mean, the evidence is very important, but you can actually use them as a checklist here in a sense to help you organize your demo. You can review the program goals and functional requirements for the module to have a good idea of the baseline questions that'll be asked and organize your demo so that you're prepared to answer those types of questions. But in addition to looking at the program goals and foundational requirements, we'd also encourage you to review, as Alex pointed out, the resource and additional consideration sections, as they include many things which, while not specific CCWIS requirements, are things that many agencies typically include in their module or their CCWIS functionality. For instance, for many agencies, it's important that intake's available 24 hours a day, and that's listed as an additional consideration, or interactions with law enforcement, or supporting remote connectivity. So by reviewing those, if your system has those, you can be prepared to address those during the demonstration. And as and to say again, they can certainly be used to prepare for the review. They can be used really as a checklist for compliance to see if you've met the requirements. But if you want to really assess if your system meets the requirement, it's really best not to just read the goal and check it off, but to develop the evidence. Because in putting down that evidence and thinking about how you really did it, you'll really get a good sense of, does your system comply, and what is the evidence, what is the background that shows that it complies, that it will comply. Now, Teresa covered in her presentation sort of the categories, the different types of evidence that you may want to consider. And I just want to note here that in upcoming webinars, we'll provide more specific examples. In other words, what we'll do in upcoming webinars is we'll provide examples for specific tools and answers for specific goals and requirements of those tools. So that's something that we'll be covering later in more depth with specific tools. Next slide, please. Of course, as we've been making clear, these, and Alex made clear, these tools are not just for the use at the end of your project when you're finished and ready for review. To really take advantage of the content of the tools, really you want to use them early and often. In fact, at every stage in your project's development. For instance, if we start out with planning, the goals, requirements, and additional resources that are listed in the tools, they can really help you define, set, bookend your project scope during your planning phase. And of course, this can then help you flesh out your project management plans. The scope will help you develop your schedule and will actually help with cost estimates for budgets, So using the tools during planning can really give you a solid base for starting your project. Moving on to procurements, the same information that's on the tools can help you draft more specific and concrete RFPs and other procurement documents. And this additional specificity will hopefully result in you getting back proposals that can be more easily evaluated against each other because they're addressing specific concrete requirements that you have in your RFPs. The information in the tools can help you make sure you haven't overlooked something when drafting a statement of work or when finalizing a contract. And it can also help you work on establishing your evaluation criteria for all the proposals and making sure that you have, as much as possible, a standardized review process for each proposal, which hopefully will also reduce the likelihood of challenges to your selection. Next slide, please. Continuing on with other project phases, the tools can be very useful in development. Although they list high-level requirements, they can actually help you make sure that your project is covering all those high-level areas and help you in the development of comprehensive user stories. You can use them throughout your development process. You can check back in again and again and use them as checklists from time to time to make sure all the major areas are covered. Also, at this point, completing the evidence can really help as well. It can document your ongoing progress towards meeting requirements. And it also serves as a measure that during development that your design and your approach is addressing the program needs and CCWIS requirements. The tools can be useful during operations and maintenance. They can provide really good documents that are an overview of a module or component. Now, while this isn't the detailed design documents that a developer will need to maintain a system, they do provide a good orientation that can help a developer develop a comprehensive overall understanding of the module that can help them maintain it much better. Finally, the tools can be used to train staff. Just as they can provide an overview for developers, they can provide a good overview of the purpose of modules and the functions from a programmatic perspective. And even if you don't use them directly for training, they have a lot of material in them that you would want to pull into your training curricula to make sure you're covering key points of modules and functions. Also, if you have staff who have never been through a CAR, and at this point, no one really has, it provides a good summary and the expectations of what will be covered in a review. As mentioned earlier, they can help you really with the demonstration, but really they'll give you a good sense of the expectations of what will be covered in a review. Next slide, please. The slides can also be used to sort of communicate and summarize your project for different activities. For instance, you may want to use them during your monthly scheduled or bi-monthly calls with your analysts. You can use them to develop an agenda for a call with your analyst. For instance, if you're going to be discussing a particular issue like security, or you want a sanity check on how you're meeting the design requirements, or if you want to see if a programmatic module is on track, you can use that tool and go through it, use it to develop an agenda to go through and identify things that you're right on track with, things that you're uncertain with and you want to discuss with your analysts. And just as a good overall sense is that you're really on track. So really, most calls that we participate in on a monthly basis, they sort of have a status check-in portion. It would be really good to use these tools to kind of like guide that, especially if you're focusing on a specific topic. They can also be served as supplements to your APD submissions. You can use the tools as a ready-made template to report progress on the APD. And because the format stays the same, they can be compared year to year and you can actually really see the evidence of your progress. Also, if you've had a CAR, you can use them, or a monitoring review or a CAR, you can continue to update them and send them in with the APD to show a measure of progress as to how you're addressing findings from your monitoring review or your CAR. Finally, another way the tools can be used to summarize is by submitting them with your software for CSWAP. This way, you really have this ready-made documentations for other agencies to use. It can help other agencies really get a good overview of how your modules work and help them assess whether your modules will help them to support their program goals and whether it's a good candidate for incorporation into their system. So once again, I just want to emphasize to use these most effectively, consider them living documents that can be updated and used and referred to again and again throughout your project. Now I'm going to turn the presentation back over to Teresa to summarize.
Thank you. Next slide, please.
Advantages of using the tools.
So David mentioned quite a few different ways you might want to use the tools. And you're hearing us, emphasize these tools quite a bit, but we want to make sure you understand it's not tools for the sake of the tool itself. It's really about making systems responsive, and making sure that the systems are going to meet the child welfare program needs for years to come. And the tools are a mechanism, to help support that mission, that we all have. And so, what were we thinking again when we created these tools in terms of how they would help? The tools force us, federal and state and tribal partners, to discuss the requirements and the quality of the evidence that you're going to demonstrate for compliance. So it forces conversations early about, how the system, is being designed and what you're thinking, in terms of how you will demonstrate that that module, is addressing those program goals. So it forces the conversations early. It also supports or gives us an opportunity, to build additional automation for metrics. We're always asked, are these systems successful? Do these systems help? What have they resulted in? Have they helped improve practice? Are they meeting the needs of the child welfare program? So we need to start thinking about not just always doing manual things that are heavy labor intensive in terms of interviews and these kinds of things, which are always important and are needed, but what kind of automation can we build in along the way that are going to provide me with metrics to demonstrate compliance on these tools? And there are probably lots of innovative ways, that you could do that or challenge your vendor to do that. And so, I would recommend, as much as you can automate in thinking about how you're going to define, your evidence, it will make it easier for you and probably more reliable in the long run. So these tools also give you more assurance, that the system is meeting needs on an ongoing basis. And it gives you tangible evidence to show an investment, a return on your investment, and why these systems make a difference. And finally, I think it makes CCWIS part of the child welfare program. I think in the past, we would sometimes hear that the system is separate from the program, or the system is not really viewed in some ways as a critical aspect, of the program. But I think now, we're in a state where data is everything. Not everything. People and humans are everything too, but data is important. And so it's critically important for us to have good data to understand the outcomes for kids and children and families, and to hold ourselves accountable, to improving practice. So I think it does give the CCWIS more of an invitation, if you will, to be a critical aspect or critical part of the program, because it encourages constant collaboration, if you will, between the program area and the technology area, as well as we talked about, the stakeholders who are impacted by the system. Next slide, please. So we are going to wrap it up. We're a little early, but that's fine. Let's go on to the next slide.
Highlights and conclusions.
Many of these topics we've talked about, in the past, the fact that these are voluntary, but we will be asking for this content. So if you opt, not to use the tools, as David said, when we are requesting demonstrations or when we're doing reviews, pretty much, the information that we're going to be inquiring about is on these tools. And again, if you've had proactive conversations, with your analyst in terms of, here's the evidence we're showing, this is what we think, this is how we're going to do this, you should be in pretty good shape, by the time those reviews occur. Again, we want the reviews to be incremental, and we want to make sure that we continue to improve. These tools are meant, again, to empower the states and tribes to build systems that they need, and also to demonstrate how these systems, are making a difference in the lives of families and children. So with that, next slide, please. We will open up for additional question and answers.
All right, thank you very much, Teresa. And again, to our participants, thank you for being here. Again, you can submit questions using that QA function or by raising your hand and we can unmute you. We are monitoring both of those. If anyone would like to share, just go ahead and raise your hand. We can unmute you. And we'll give you a few seconds to ask your question. And in the meantime, Teresa, I think I will just open this up for just a moment to our other panelists, both Alex and David, to see if you had any final thoughts before we wrap up or respond to any final questions.
One of the questions that sometimes folks talk to me about have to do with just a feeling of being overwhelmed with the CCWIS project team, if you will, being responsible for program goals that are out of their span of control. And so sometimes folks will talk to me about the need for resources, that this really starts to get at, how the project team relates to leadership in the program area. And, in order to be successful, for example, with data quality, you may need, yes, you need automation, but you may need additional resources, and you may have, multiple efforts going on. So it does add significant, responsibility to us. And so I guess what I would say is talk to us about those needs. We can't obviously meet all needs, but if there are ways to incorporate some of the resources into the project budgets, if there are conversations that would be helpful with your leadership, examples, anything like that, that we can do, to kind of help with that concern, we want to do. So let us know. I jumped in there, but I don't know if we've gotten a question in the interim or if David and Alex had any time to think about something that they think might be important to talk about.
Just one question's come in, and that is, will recordings of these webinars be made available?
Yes, yes, we will definitely post them. And we also make the webinars available to folks who request them ahead of time from posting them if you need them right away. So we do post them, but it takes a little while for them to get 508 compliance so that we can actually put them on our website. But we do send them out ahead of time, and we certainly can provide the slide deck.
All right, well, thank you, Teresa. It looks like we have responded to the questions. I think you wanted to cover a few resources before we wrap up.
Right. By now, I'm hoping that most of you are familiar with these resources, but I know your lives are very busy. So if you aren't, Technical Bulletin 7 was released. It's on our website. It is what we went over in part 1. It's kind of the overview of the technical assistance review process and technical assistance opportunities and the self-assessment tools themselves. And then we have lots of support on our website for webinars and technical bulletins and information memorandums that are on our website. And again, we did the webinar on the design requirement itself, and it's about a year old, which it's hard for me to believe that it's already a year old, and we are working on improvements as we speak, based on what we've learned so far. But if you haven't had the opportunity to look at that webinar, it's definitely worth looking up. So again, I know, we are getting ready to wind up. Any concerns or suggestions, please feel free to, make them before we leave, or please make sure to include them on the satisfaction survey.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much, Teresa, Alex, and David. And also to all of our panelists, and our participants, thank you for attending today's webinar. Please contact your assigned analyst if you have any suggestions, feedbacks, questions, or issues. If you're unsure who your analyst is, you can find your assigned analyst at this website here. which is at the acf.hhs.gov, CB Training Technical Assistance State and Tribal Assignments. Also, as Teresa just mentioned, both part 1 and part 2 of this webinar series will be posted on the Children's Bureau's website on our webinars and training materials page, which you see listed there, that you're able to access at webinars and training materials, the Administration for Children and Families. So we will make you aware of that. Lastly, we would love to continue to get your feedback, so please participate in this satisfaction survey. It just should take you just a few moments, but we do appreciate your valuable feedback. The results, of course, will be used to help us improve our technical assistance and webinar content in the future to support you and what you're doing to build child welfare information systems. All these questions are voluntary and your responses will remain anonymous. With that, again, I would like to thank all of our panelists and our participants, and that will conclude today's webinar. Thank you for being here.